about dying. If you know Jesus, then you get to know his heart, you get to see what his agenda is, you get to see what he's up to, and you see that, you know what, life is not about what you get for yourself, but it's how you become a servant. It's how you love, it's how you give your life away for the sake of others. So if I'm able to keep on living so I can keep blessing people around me, that's fantastic. Then you finally have figured out what this life is for. So my question to us is, as we talk about things like buildings and land, are we ready to say with the Apostle Paul, for me to live is Christ, and for me to die is gain? Because if we can say yes to both of those things, then I think we're ready for Jesus to build his church upon us. Then we can start looking at some of those other things. Well, my question to you is, are you ready to say in your own life that for you to die is gain? Are you at a place where I look at myself and okay, yeah, I believe I'm going to go to heaven, but I'm still a little bit anxious about all of that. But to be at the place where you know him so well that it's not even just a question of being anxious about going to heaven, but it's, I'm excited. I'm thrilled about the concept of dying. Sort of looking at some of those martyrs through history. They didn't just tolerate being burned at the stake. Some of them were in ecstatic joy as they were being burned at the stake because they had this connection with Jesus. They knew him and they were excited to be with him. What would it be like to have that kind of attitude? So, are we ready to die? Because once we're ready to die, then maybe we're ready for Jesus to build the church on us. But I think sometimes as Christians we'll say, yes, I believe in Jesus, I know I'm going to heaven, so I'm ready to die. But maybe the big challenge for us is, are we ready to live? And I mean live not just as exist and take care of our own personal needs, but to live for the sake of our neighbor. Am I ready to pour out my life, take risks to love my neighbor? Because that's the other side of the equation. That unless we're ready to live, not just for our own sake, but for the sake of our neighbor, then maybe we're not ready for Jesus to build the church on us yet. So, Jonah was someone who basically didn't understand life or death very well. He was someone who was supposed to have the right connections with God, to be the privilege of being the prophet, but he didn't understand what life was about, and he didn't understand what death was about. The thing that made Paul ready to live or to die was because he knew the heart of God, he knew Jesus, and because he knew and loved Jesus, he was ready to die and he was ready to give his life away to live for others. But Jonah didn't have quite that same understanding. He knew the heart of God, but he didn't really like the heart of God. You know, I knew that you're going to end up letting these awful people off so that you would forgive them, but I don't like that option. And as a matter of fact, I'm pretty embarrassed because I just told 120,000 people you're going to destroy them, and now you're making me look bad by not destroying them. You're messing up my reputation as a prophet. I would look much better if you just killed all these people. I don't like your priorities. You shouldn't forgive these people. And basically, Jonah is God is saying, why are you so upset? Because Jonah was thinking the reason he was living was to make himself look good as a prophet. And the whole purpose was that if he understood what his life was about, it was so that God could bring salvation to people. But he didn't like God's agenda. He didn't like God's heart. And the process, when God says, what are you so upset about? Jonah basically says, I'm so upset that I just want to die. The reason he wanted to die was not like Paul because he knew how good God was. The reason he wanted to die was because he didn't like God. I don't want to keep on doing your work because I don't like the way you do things, God. So he didn't know how to live and he didn't know how to die. So our parable for today, we're going to keep looking at what different aspects of the kingdom, that as long as we're alive on this earth, what is it that we're supposed to look like if we are living our life for the sake of our neighbor? And in the kingdom, basically that's how this parable starts out. The kingdom of heaven is like. It's like a landowner. So what does that look like if that's what the kingdom of heaven, if that's what the activity of heaven looks like, and if we are the culture of heaven, what is it that we're to look like? What is that landowner constantly doing? Is he just getting a few people together to start working on his purposes and then forgetting about everybody else? No, that landowner is constantly going back and finding if there's others who don't know about what's going on. Others that feel like they're left out, like they don't belong. He's constantly going out and saying, you know what? You don't have to stay out here. You don't need to be an outsider. You don't need to feel worthless. Come and be part of what I'm up to. Come and be part of something bigger than yourself. He's constantly going out because he doesn't want anybody to be left outside. And then at the end, it's interesting. He says, okay, now let's hand out the paychecks. And I think that he's feeling a heart for those who are hired at the end. Because they're probably thinking, you know what? I really don't know if I belong. I probably really shouldn't be here. I really shouldn't have gotten a job. I'm not really good enough to be part of this group. And he wants to start out by reaffirming them, you know what? You're valuable. You belong here. You have all the access to the resources of my kingdom that everybody else does. Just because you came here last, just because you spent most of your life feeling like you didn't belong, like you couldn't be loved, like you weren't to be part of something bigger than yourself. In this community, we want to make sure that you're the first one to know that you belong. You're the first one to know that you're valued. But what did the rest of the people think? The ones who had worked the whole day? You know what? If they get that, then we should get more because we've invested more, we've been here longer. That's not the culture of the kingdom. And as we think about where our church is going, let me tell you that if you're here saying, I've been here for 51 years, so I'm the one who should say what's going on in this church, you're wrong. That's not the culture of the kingdom. I guess I shouldn't have been that blunt. I know. But the whole point is that we're not here to discern what we deserve, but we're here to think about how can we make sure that there are less people standing on the outside feeling like they don't belong. How can we create a culture where we're connecting with our community and not just saying, well, we've got enough to do the work that we want to do, we can just ignore everybody else. So the culture of the kingdom is a culture that it's not about me, but when I understand that the heart of Christ, to live is Christ. You know what? I feel like I'm supposed to stay here, Paul says, because by staying here, I can keep on giving myself away for my neighbor. I can keep on risking my life so that you can know Jesus. So I think that's what I'm supposed to do. I think I'm supposed to stay even though I'd love to go and be with Jesus. Because by staying, he's getting to know Jesus as he meets Jesus in the ones that are feeling left out. As he meets Jesus in serving those who feel like God couldn't love them. So I want to invite you to be thinking in your own life today and in this week ahead. How do you answer that question? Can you say with Paul, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain? Because if you're still anxious about whether you're ready to die, then I want you to experience more of Jesus and his love. Because the more you know him, the more that you're ready to die, and the more that Jesus can build his church on you. But the other side of the equation is this life just about you? Is this life just about surviving till tomorrow? Is it just about getting what you want? Then it's time for you to have a meeting with Jesus as well. And say, teach me what life is about. It's not about saving myself, but it's about having a heart for my neighbor. It's about being willing to, as Paul will say, I'm willing to spend and be spent so that you can know Jesus. Because in the process, then we really discover what life is about. And on this weekend, we're here in our own city. We had a priest from a little town named Okarchi that was sent to Guatemala. And he came back to Oklahoma City, and he could have been safe. But it's interesting, I was watching one little video clip, and it said, but he knew that staying here would not be living. So he went back to Guatemala not to die, but to live. And that statement stuck with me. He ended up dying, but he wouldn't have lived if he would have stayed here. He lived because he went where Jesus called him to go. And he wasn't some big fancy guy. He was a small town Oklahoma guy who just chose to make himself available to God. We might not be big fancy people here at Resurrection, but we are people who can hear what God's calling us to do. And we can say, you know what, if I keep playing it safe, I'm never going to live. The only way I'm going to live is by taking the risk of hearing where Jesus is calling and then saying, okay, I'm going to go. I'm in.